My name is Adam. I'm 18 years old, and I'm not someone who likes a lot of drama. I live in a small town where everything seems to repeat itself day after day. Everything's always the same. No big surprises. My sister Emma is 10 years old, and since her parents work late, I have to pick her up from school. No big deal, really. Just a walk of about 15 minutes that we always do together. The route is always the same. We pass the same street in front of the same houses. One of them, however, always caught my eye. Not because it's particularly old or strange, but because in its garden, there's something I don't like, even though I haven't told anyone. A scarecrow with a pumpkin hat. The body is simple, with tattered clothes and outstretched arms like any other scarecrow. But what makes me uncomfortable is that the pumpkin always seemed to be looking in different directions. Every time I pass by, the head is turned a different way. At first I thought someone was in charge of moving it from time to time, but after so many times, I started to sense something else. Something about that thing disturbed me, although I didn't exactly know what. Worst of all, sometimes I felt like it was looking directly at me, as if its empty pumpkin eyes were pointed at me, watching me. It was absurd, but that feeling made me walk faster every time. I never told Emma about it. She didn't pay much attention to the scarecrow. I think I was the only one who noticed it that much. She didn't pay much attention to the scarecrow. Something inside me told me it was better not to talk about it, not to give it more importance than I had already had in my mind. 3 days ago, like any other day, I went to pick up Emma from school. The day had been exhausting, and the truth is, the last thing I wanted to do was go through that damn house again. But I did as usual. However, this time something was different. The scarecrow was gone. I stopped dead in front of the house. I looked around, trying to see if he had been moved somewhere. There was no sign of him. I stood still, checking to see if he had been put somewhere else. Then Emma tugged on my arm. Emma asked me what was wrong, but I didn't know what to say. I didn't want to scare her, so I told her it was nothing and just kept walking. But suddenly, a man appeared in front of us. He was an old man with dirty clothes and messy hair. The old man had a blank stare and a tremor in his hands. We stopped in our tracks. "Have you seen him?" I didn't understand what he meant. Emma moved closer to me, as if sensing something wasn't right. "Have you seen the scarecrow?" "It's gone," I replied without thinking too much, just wanting the man to move away. But instead, he took a step closer to us, a crooked smile on his face. "Be careful, he's mad at you. He doesn't like you looking at him so much." "Wait, you're the one who's always moving the scarecrow?" "No, I don't touch him. He won't let me touch him. Seriously though, be careful. He talks to me in my sleep. He tells me you look at him. If he's gone, maybe it's for something." Uncomfortable and looking out for Emma, I made us keep walking and ignored him. Emma was scared, but I told her not to worry. There are always crazy people on the street. But that same night, I couldn't stop thinking about the old man. How did he know I used to watch the scarecrow? When I went to sleep, the first thing that came to my mind was the scarecrow, the pumpkin with its empty smile, and the eyes that always seemed to be more attentive than they should. That feeling followed me until I finally fell asleep. That's when the nightmare started. I was in my room, unable to move. My eyes were open, but my body was completely paralyzed. I tried to move my hands and feet, but nothing. Terror invaded me when I realized that something was in the room with me. In front of me in the corner was the scarecrow, but it wasn't the same one I had seen in the garden of the house. No, this one was alive. Its eyes, or the holes where they should be, glowed with a strange light, and its gourd seemed to rise as if something was moving inside it. I tried to scream, but no sound came out of my mouth. Then, from the holes in the pumpkin, worms began to come out. First one, then hundreds, thousands. They slowly advanced toward me, crawling across the floor, across my bed, and across my body. I felt them crawling into my ears, into my mouth, into my eyes. It was an indescribable horror. I couldn't move. I couldn't scream. I could only feel how those creatures entered my body. And then I woke up. I woke up drenched in sweat, my heart beating a mile a minute. It took me a moment to realize that it had all been a dream. I staggered to my feet, my head spinning, and went to the kitchen for a glass of water to calm down. When I returned before going back to bed, I looked out the window into the courtyard. What I saw froze me in my tracks. There in the middle of the garden was the scarecrow. My first impulse was to go out. I wanted to see it up close to confirm that it wasn't another nightmare. I took courage and opened the door. Walking towards the pumpkin that was perfectly placed at the top, I looked at it closely. The smile was still there, empty and crooked, but there was nothing strange about it. No worms, no light, just a pumpkin, motionless. But when I turned around to go back, I felt a pressure on the back of my head. Something was squeezing my skull hard. I fell to my knees, screaming in pain. The pressure was increasing. It felt like my head was going to explode. The bones began to crunch, and the pain became unbearable. The Scarecrow was squeezing. It was moving as if it were a person. I could feel my skull cracking into 1,000 pieces. My eyes were popping out. I could only see red. The blood coming out of my eye sockets had blurred all my vision. And then suddenly, I woke up again. My breathing was agitated, my body trembling. I had fallen asleep again, or maybe I had never woken up in the first place. I had no idea what had happened. I looked at the clock. It was early morning, but I couldn't go back to sleep. I got up again, this time more calmly, trying to convince myself that everything that was happening wasn't real, that they were just dreams provoked by the old man and his words. I went to the courtyard again, looking for some sign of what I had seen before. But there was nothing. The Scarecrow was gone. I returned to my room, calmer, though still with an uneasy feeling. But as I entered, I fell to the floor in surprise. I pinched myself to see if it was a dream, but no, I was awake. On my bed rested a pumpkin identical to the one in the Scarecrow.
How many of you have been on the deep web? And no, I'm not talking about the child's play of downloading to enter the first level of the deep web and then leaving it. That's for amateur. I mean, how many of you have been on the real deep web? The part of the deep web where scary things really happen, where the government hides all the secrets and where red rooms are rampant. Unless you're hackers, I don't think you've been there. So, I have to tell you a story. A story where you'll learn that no matter how prepared you are for the deep web, there will always be someone or something that will surprise you. I still remember everything as if it was yesterday. The date was February 14th, 2022. I remember because it was Valentine's Day, shortly before my girlfriend and I had separated. She simply contacted me by phone and crying, said that everything between us was over. I didn't understand why, but when I tried to call her, she didn't answer. I went to her house worried, but some neighbors told me that she had moved a few days before and that she was with someone else. I didn't understand what happened to her, but I was heartbroken, so you can imagine how I could feel on Valentine's Day. I was going to spend that day at home exploring the deep web, going further than I had ever gone before. I was convinced that no one would catch me. I had always been a very good hacker, and after being with my ex-girlfriend who worked in computer security, I had become much better. I felt invulnerable. I felt that no one could catch me no matter what files I investigated and whose files they were. The more I researched, the deeper I got into the deep web. I felt I was close to reaching my limits, close to discovering something, and maybe getting into trouble. That would be a fun activity for Valentine's Day. As I continued to move forward, a pop-up surprised me. A pop-up on the deep web. I must admit, I was very surprised. There are no advertisements on the deep web. This had to be something directed at me. But how could they do that? How could they direct a message to me? Did anyone know what I was doing? That was impossible. I had taken all the necessary measures so that no one would launch an attack on me. When I saw the pop-up, I noticed that it looked like an advertisement, or rather, an invitation. It looked like an invitation to play a game. Suddenly, a text window opened. Someone started talking to me. Normally, I wouldn't talk to him, as this can bring consequences. But his message left me so perplexed that I had to reply. Hi Rick, you seem to be a very curious guy. Would you like to play a game with us? No thanks. I think I'm good. Maybe another day I'll do it. I decided to answer him sarcastically, but not be so confrontational either. He may have been uncomfortable with that message, but I decided not to indulge him. I wouldn't ask him how he knew my name or anything about this game, since that's what he expected me to do. I assumed that the attacker was related to the government entity I was investigating. Although I never assumed that these people would send me these kind of messages, part of me thought it made sense. After all, I was on the deep web. Rick, unfortunately, I have to insist that you play. Otherwise, your ex-girlfriend will never be released. Reading this, I was shocked. How could he possibly have said that? And how did he know about my girlfriend? How could he say that she was kidnapped? At that moment, I realized something that terrified me and made me discover that I was involved in something really serious. You're not from any government entity, are you? The game is simple. You just have to guess where I am. It's not too hard, is it? You only have one chance to guess right. I can be behind your bathtub, hidden in the kitchen, or in the basement. As I read these words, I was completely paralyzed. From one moment to the next, I went from being bored at home, sad to arrive on Valentine's Day without my girlfriend, and in the next few minutes, I was worried that there was a psychopath in my house. There's no way this psycho is really here. He has to be lying. We both know I'm not lying, Rick. Upon reading this message, I immediately disconnected the webcam and microphone from my computer. Did you really think you were going to scare me by hacking my webcam? Who says I hacked your webcam? Don't you understand that I'm in your house? If you don't give me an answer in the next 3 minutes, I will kill your girlfriend. Reading that message, I was completely perplexed. There was no way. How could he hear me if I disconnected my webcam? Unless he had microphones installed in the house. That means that he could be in my house 2 minutes and 30 seconds. Desperate and without thinking, I went to the kitchen to get a knife and started checking the places that the man told me he could be. I knew it was a very bad idea. I knew I could die for this. But the fact that he told me that my girlfriend was trapped and kidnapped made me make a quick decision without thinking. I had to search as soon as possible. I quickly checked the kitchen with a knife in hand, but there was no one there. There was no place to hide in the kitchen either. Clearly, the man wanted me to quickly discard this place. The next place was the bathroom. I quickly opened the bathroom doors and turned on the light. No one was there. At that moment, something caught my attention. The bathroom curtain was closed. I always leave it open. Terrified, I approached slowly with the knife. I didn't have the energy to do it. I felt like I was going to cry and drop the knife and run at any moment. But I didn't. I had to do it. I had to catch whoever was invading my house just to make sure my girlfriend was okay. With a war cry, I ran to the curtain and opened it. Behind it, there was no one. At that moment, I felt a noise behind me. I peeked through the bathroom door, and in the distance, I saw the basement door. It was opening slowly, and behind it, in the middle of all the darkness, I could make out only two dark eyes staring at me. I immediately ran to my room. I heard the door behind me open and someone running towards me. I didn't turn around. I just ran, and as soon as I entered my room, I locked the door. On the other side, someone was banging on it, violently trying to get in. I could hear screams full of anger while that person was slamming the door without success, since it was a very hard door. 30 seconds. You were in my basement. There's your answer. You were in the basement. Now you're behind my door. Now let her go. Suddenly, the door started banging louder and louder. I thought they wouldn't be able to break it. But at that moment, I realized that it would surely be destroyed in a matter of seconds. And so, from 1 second to the next, the door burst open with a kick and a huge man rushed in. As soon as he saw me, the man grabbed me by the hair and dragged me violently across the floor and threw me against the wall. Before I could react, the man grabbed my head again and pulled me towards the computer. As I looked at it, I saw that there was a camera in my basement. The man held a cell phone to my ear and I heard a titler voice come out of it. You were right. I was in the basement. Although you were wrong that I was behind your door. As I said, we will free your girlfriend. At that moment, it was seen on the computer camera that the closet in my basement opened where my girlfriend's corpse fell. Our clients are very satisfied with your story. You deserve to know the truth. What have you done to her? Why? Congratulations. Your girlfriend never left you. We forced her to say that before we killed her. That neighbor who told you she moved, that was me. It was nice to meet you. Although, I'm sorry to tell you that your girlfriend was always in this basement, even though we cleaned it constantly so it wouldn't generate odor. Why? Because you were curious. Do you think you wouldn't attract attention in the deep levels of the deep web? A lot of my clients belong to codes, and you can't mess with these people. They have more fun than you think, and you have a lot of fun, but all good things must come to an end. And with that said, it was all over. The man casually let me go and simply walked out of the front door as if he had been a guest of mine. Meanwhile, the corpse of my girlfriend remained there in my basement. I could never recover from what happened. I could never again date a new girl, go on the deep web, or build any kind of trusting relationship. What happened that day has traumatized me forever. And you know what the worst part is? I feel like I'm not done yet. Sometimes I see strange people looking at me in the street with a strange smile. I don't feel that these people are the ones who attacked me, but the cult that hired them. I feel that they will always be there, watching me, having fun with me, ready to attack me when I least expect it. Hi, my name is Richard, and I'm just a normal guy. I'm married with 2 kids today. My kids are pretty mad at me. They both had a field trip, and I didn't let either of them go. All their friends were going, and I still decided not to let them go. They may not have understood why, but my wife did. And now you'll understand why I didn't let them go. Several years ago, when I was still in high school, we had a field trip that turned out to be the scariest experience of my life. It was a sunny fall day, the kind of day when you don't expect anything to go wrong. We were taken into an ancient forest, seemingly harmless, with narrow paths and tall trees that blocked most of the sunlight. The cool air and the crunching of the dry leaves under our feet created an environment that should have been peaceful. But as is often the case, appearances can be deceiving. At the beginning, the trip was completely normal. We knew the tour guide, Mr. Ford, so my parents trusted him to take us on the trip. Once we got there, the school bus pulled into the forest, and Mr. Ford went to run some errands at the Rares' cabin. That's when the weirdness started to happen. After a few minutes of just standing around doing nothing, the tour guide came back. But this was not Mr. Ford. The tour guide was an older man with a cold and distant look on his face. He seemed very demanding and professional, though not very good with children. Listen guys, Mr. Ford's not feeling well, so he asked me to be his replacement. You can call me Mr. Ashford. I was a guide for a long time, and even though I don't work with kids from your school, everyone here knows me. What happened to Mr. Ford? Health issues. Nothing any of you would be interested in. Now, I need you kids to listen to one more thing. We will continue with the trip as long as you listen to everything I tell you to do. Understood. With that said, the trip continued. Mr. Ashford took us deeper into the forest than we had originally planned. As we moved on, I noticed that the atmosphere was getting thicker, and the feeling of being watched came over me. I tried to ignore it, thinking it was just my imagination, but something in the air wasn't right. As we moved deeper into the forest, I noticed that some of my classmates seemed uneasy, as if they felt the same way I did. Ignoring the uncomfortable feeling, the guide led us to a more secluded area, away from other groups, exploring the same area. It was then that I saw him for the first time. Among the trees, a lone man dressed in rags with disheveled hair was just staring at us. His gaze was intense, almost predatory. When the guide saw him, he simply greeted him as if he were an old friend and walked on, ignoring the puzzled looks of the students. We continued our march, but the discomfort persisted. We felt his eyes on us. He didn't look like a simple lost hiker or a friend of Mr. Ashford's, but since he knew him, we all trusted him blindly. As we moved on, the guide led us to a clearing in the forest where we decided to take a break. We sat on fallen logs while he told us about the history of the place. As he spoke, my eyes couldn't help but search for the strange man, but he was no longer in sight. We decided to resume our walk after a brief pause. It was then that things took a darker turn. As we walked, the guy became increasingly incoherent in his explanations, as if he was losing his mind. He would laugh to himself and make jokes that were totally out of place and made no sense. It was as if he was someone else. Suddenly, the guide stopped and gave us a very strange order. Well guys, from now on, you'll have to look for the focal point. What's that? You guys look for something out of the ordinary in the forest without going too far. Sooner or later, everyone will find it. No one understood what he meant, but we obeyed. That's when strange things started to happen. My classmates began to disappear, one by one. Muffled screams echoed through the forest, but when we tried to locate the source, we found nothing but shadows in the trees. When there were only a few of us left, I finally saw the man in rags again. He materialized out of the underbrush with a sadistic smile that chilled my blood. The man had an axe in his hands and was slowly approaching us. We started to back away in fear, but suddenly we were confronted by the guide, who now seemed completely unhinged. They both looked at us with merciless eyes, enjoying the palpable fear that was in the air. We tried to flee, but we were surrounded. It was then that I understood what was happening. These two men were together. Everything the guide had told us so far was a lie. An elaborate lie to get us safely off the trail. Suddenly, the two men rushed towards us, grabbing a teenager each. Some of us wanted to fight, but we were no more than 15 years old, and no one dared to stand up to them. We ran and ran. Some of us started to get lost, and then we heard their screams in the forest. They chased us through the forest, faster and faster, with unhinged laughter echoing all around us. My lungs burned, my legs trembled, but I couldn't stop running. The forest seemed endless, as if we were trapped in a hellish maze. Finally, when we were on the verge of exhaustion, they cornered us in a dark clearing. They surrounded us, laughing with blood-chilling malevolence. The nightmare reached its climax when the guide, with crazed eyes, began to talk about rituals and sacrifices. Haven't you found the focal point yet, children? The focal point is in the center of your breasts. It's where your heart is, and soon, everyone will be able to see it. We will rip it out of your chests and show it to you before we give you to the forest. We all began to cry. We all felt that our last hour was coming, and there was nothing we could do to avoid them. But it was then that I made a desperate decision. While the guide and the man were still talking about what they were going to do to us, I quickly slipped through a small space between the trees and ran as fast as I'd ever ran before. I didn't look back. I didn't think of anything but escaping from that horror. I ended up back at the hut where it all started. I opened the doors and desperately looked for help. And that's when I found a familiar face. It was Mr. Ford, brutally butchered. I fell to the floor and vomited. I never thought I would come across such a scene. I opened the door and ran everywhere, totally lost and bewildered. Fortunately, I managed to find help from a group of hikers who were in a busier part of the forest. We called the police, but when they returned to the place where the nightmare took place, they found no trace of the perpetrators or my missing classmates. They were never heard from again. Today, the relatives are still looking for them, but after the story I told them, they lost hope. Many have asked me if the screams I heard were those of their children. It was really very difficult to distinguish them. Today, I'm old enough to be able to think about what happened to me without crying. But you know what? It scarred me for life. As I told you before, I will never let my children go on any field trip when I'm not there to take care of them.
Hey, my name is Carson, and I'll tell you a story of how a stalker almost ruined my life. A short time ago, I installed one of those security cameras that activate every time someone rings the doorbell or approaches the door. The idea was simple. I deterred to potential burglars or stalkers. However, nothing could stop whoever was harassing me during that time. It was a night like any other. I was home alone, engrossed in the monotony of watching TV, when I received the first notification from the camera app. At first, I thought it was just a glitch, maybe some shadow or movement caused by the wind. But the second notification made me look up from the screen. On the small screen of my phone, I saw a man standing in my doorway. His face was hidden by a hood, but his posture denoted a kind of tension. He wasn't carrying any bags or packages. He was just standing there as if waiting for something. I froze for a moment, wondering who it could be and what he might want at this time of night. I decided not to open the door and instead activated the intercom to ask him what he needed. However, all I got was an ominous silence. The figure stood emotionless for a few minutes, and then, as if it had received some invisible signal, it turned and walked away. It was strange, but I thought maybe it was just a lost neighbor or someone who had taken a wrong turn. I closed the app and went back to my business, trying to forget about the strange visit. But the peace didn't last long. After a few hours, the bell rang again. This time, I was more prepared. I looked at the screen, and again, the same man was there, with his hood still covering his face. He seemed to be looking directly into the camera. I couldn't help but feel a shiver run down my spine. I opted to ignore the situation and not interact with him. But what happened next made me reconsider my decision. The figure raised his hand and slammed the door several times loudly. The sound echoed through the house, and his persistence filled me with discomfort. Getting no response, he finally withdrew again. A few days passed, and the nightly visits became an unsettling routine. Although I tried not to show it, the constant pressure began to get to me. The nights became tense, and the ringing of the bell became a kind of psychological torture. I decided to report the incident to the police. But what would they do? Without clear evidence of a threat, they couldn't do much. They suggested increasing security in the house and being vigilant. So, I installed brighter lights and reinforced the locks. But the figure kept coming. The police told me they would go around the neighborhood, but I looked out at night and hardly saw them. I couldn't blame them either. This man had been stalking me for weeks. Surely the police officers would have better things to do than watch the house for weeks waiting for a stalker to decide to strike when they didn't even know if he was going to. Hell, even I didn't know if he was going to do it. Maybe I was making too much trouble for something minuscule, or at least that's what I thought, before the night when it all happened. That night started like any other. This time I was more attentive than ever to the appearance of that man. I was going to catch him on camera, either on the doorbell camera or on my cell phone. I didn't have to wait long after bedtime before the door started to rattle. Someone was banging on it. I ran to the front door while calling the police. As soon as I told them what was happening, I disobeyed their advice to hide in my room and wait for them to come and go to the front door. I knew the police would not arrive in time. Somehow, I had to get a picture of him. Once I was at the door, I looked through the keyhole and set up my camera. But I was shocked. There was no one there. The stalker always takes much longer to leave, usually a long time knocking on my door. Maybe he saw a policeman or a neighbor and left. Whatever the case, he had escaped me again. I went back to my room to wait for the police, but suddenly, something surprised me. What was that noise? Without thinking if I was making the right decision, I quickly ran to the source of the noise. It was coming from the dining room. Once I arrived, the whole dining room was full of glass. I looked around the glass and saw something else. A brick. Someone had thrown it, and I knew who. As if manifesting my thoughts, my stalker entered my house through the window. Once he entered the window, he simply stood there looking at me. At his gaze, I slowly approached the door, but it was obviously locked, and the key was upstairs. The man began to approach slowly. For the first time, I saw his face. It was completely ruined. It was as if a big fire had ruined it for many years. His eyes were full of veins and were almost red, showing me that a lot of blood had accumulated in them. Was this man sick? As he approached me, he had a reaction that made my blood run cold. He began to laugh. He began to laugh like a maniac, in a way I had never seen anyone laugh before. While he was laughing, the psychopath was scratching violently all over his body, as if trying to get rid of insects he didn't have. Suddenly, as if it was nothing, he stopped laughing. His look changed again. Now, he was completely serious, and from serious, he became furious. As if it was nothing, the stalker screamed at me violently and started running in my direction. I tried to run towards the kitchen to grab a knife, but I couldn't advance, even 3 steps, as the psychopath was already ahead of me. With excessive brutality, he lunged at me and threw me against the wall. I fell to the floor dizzy, but without giving a break, the man began to kick me brutally on the floor. If you had only seen his face, he was a normal man, but he looked possessed. I had never seen anyone attack another person with such anger and savagery. This man seemed to hate me, even though he had never seen me in his whole life. When I was too tired to fight, the stalker stopped kicking me and stepped on my face with contempt, as if I were a cockroach. As I cried and thought these were my last moments, he just spat at me with contempt. And as he came, he left. My confusion was absolute. Why had the man beaten me up and just walked away? He didn't try to rob me, kidnap me, or do anything to me. He just beat me up and left. In pain, I crawled to the window to see if he was gone, and to my surprise, I was in for something else. The man came out of the window as if waiting for me. He dragged me through the glass and carried me outside, where he kept kicking me on the ground. You shouldn't have moved. Suddenly, we both heard the police sirens in the distance. Bored, the man stopped kicking me and left. When the police saw me lying on the ground in pain, they didn't even try to follow him. Maybe they didn't even know he was nearby. They immediately ran to me and called the ambulance, checking to see if I was alive or if they could do anything to save me. Soon after, I ended up in the hospital. Although there were several recordings of the man, he was never fully identified, so they could not capture him either. As soon as I was released from the hospital, I stayed at a friend's house until I was able to sell the house and move again. I never heard from the man again, and to tell you the truth, I'm more than happy with that. The only thing that makes me feel bad at night is the thought that when he was done with me, he probably went looking for another victim, and maybe that victim wasn't as lucky to survive as I did.
Thank you for watching. Don't forget to like, share, comment and subscribe, or follow for more stories on Fun Tales for All.